Let's begin with a truth that most people underestimate because it's quiet, almost invisible, and that is this. Attraction rarely announces itself in words. It reveals itself in behavior. In the smallest shifts, the briefest moments, the things that happen automatically before logic has time to interfere. Most men are conditioned to listen for clarity. They want something direct, something obvious, clear interest, clear signals, clear confirmation. But human nature doesn't operate that way, especially in the early stages of attraction. What is real tends to show up subtly, often beneath conscious awareness, and that's exactly why it's so powerful, because when something is unconscious, it's unfiltered. Think about how the body responds when interest is present. There's a slight lean forward, almost as if pulled by curiosity. Eye contact doesn't just happen, it lingers, then returns again as if the mind hasn't quite finished processing what it felt in that moment. Even small things like adjusting posture, smoothing hair, or mirroring your movements begin to appear, not as deliberate actions, but as natural responses. And here's the key, these signals are not performed, they're revealed. That distinction matters because anything performed can be controlled, filtered, even faked. But what's revealed, especially at a subconscious level, tends to be honest. The body doesn't strategize, it reacts. And those reactions, when you learn to observe them, tell a story far more accurate than words ever could. Now, this doesn't mean every small gesture is a sign of attraction. That's where many people go wrong. They isolate a single behavior and assign meaning to it. But human behavior doesn't work in isolation. It works in patterns. It's the repetition, the consistency, the combination of signals that creates clarity. For example, a brief glance might mean nothing. But repeated glances, combined with a shift in posture, combined with increased attentiveness, that begins to form a pattern. And patterns are where truth lives. This is why awareness becomes such a critical skill. Not overanalysis, not forcing interpretations, but simple, grounded observation. The ability to notice without immediately reacting, because the moment you become reactive, trying to interpret, trying to respond too quickly, you break your connection to what's actually happening. Awareness requires patience. It requires you to slow down and pay attention to what most people ignore. The rhythm of interaction, the subtle changes in energy. The difference between someone who is simply present and someone who is engaged, because engagement has a different quality. It's more focused, more intentional, even when it's not consciously expressed. And here's where it gets even deeper. When you begin to operate from this level of awareness, something shifts in your own behavior. You stop chasing certainty through words, and you start trusting what you observe. That shift alone changes your presence. It makes you more grounded, more composed, less reactive. And people feel that because most interactions are filled with noise, people talking, trying to impress, trying to prove something. But when you're the one who is calm, observant, and tuned in, you stand out without effort. Not because you're doing more, but because you're doing less and doing it with intention. This doesn't just improve your ability to recognize attraction. It improves the quality of your interactions as a whole. You become more attuned, more responsive, more aligned with what's actually happening in the moment. And that's where real connection begins, not in what is said, but in what is understood without needing to be said. So as you move forward, shift your focus, stop waiting for obvious signals, for clear declarations, for something that feels undeniable. Instead, start paying attention to the quiet indicators, the small, consistent behaviors that reveal what words often hide. Because in the end, the people who understand human nature aren't the ones who hear the most, they're the ones who notice the most. And when you learn to see what others overlook, you stop guessing and start knowing. Now, once you begin to understand that attraction reveals itself in subtle behavior, the next layer becomes even more precise, because not all signals carry the same weight. And one of the most powerful yet most misunderstood is eye contact. Most people think eye contact is simple. You look, they look back, and that's it. But real attraction doesn't operate on a single glance. It operates on patterns, specifically the pattern of returning attention. There's a difference between seeing someone and being drawn to them. In everyday interactions, eye contact happens out of necessity. It's part of communication, part of basic social awareness. But when attraction is present, something shifts. The eyes don't just meet yours, they come back to you again and again, not always in an obvious or dramatic way, but in a consistent, almost subconscious loop. At repetition is where the meaning lives. Think about it from a psychological standpoint. Attention is one of the most valuable resources we have. Where we place it, and more importantly, where it returns, reveals what's engaging us on a deeper level. When someone's gaze keeps finding its way back to you, it's not random. It's driven by curiosity, by interest, by a subtle pull that hasn't yet been fully articulated. And here's the key. It's not just frequency, it's quality. There's a certain texture to eye contact when attraction is present. It lingers just slightly longer than necessary. It softens rather than sharpens. There's focus, but not intensity. It feels natural, not forced. And often there's a brief break, a look away, followed by a return, as if the mind needed a moment to process what it just felt. This cycle, engage, break, re-engage, is incredibly telling. But again, context matters. A single moment of eye contact means very little on its own. What you're looking for is consistency over time. Does the attention come back when there's no obvious reason for it to? Does it happen even when the conversation shifts or when others are present? These are the details that separate casual interaction from genuine interest. Now, here's where many men make a critical mistake. They either overinterpreting leads to assumption. One glance becomes a story, a conclusion, a belief that something is there when it may not be. And that creates pressure, which disrupts the natural flow of interaction. On the other hand, underreacting means missing the signal entirely. Dismissing it as nothing, overlooking the pattern, staying unaware, both extremes disconnect you from reality. The goal is not to assume, it's to observe. To stay grounded enough to notice patterns without forcing meaning onto them. Because when you remain neutral, when you allow the behavior to reveal itself over time, clarity emerges naturally. You don't have to chase it. Another important layer here is how you respond. When you recognize repeated eye contact, the instinct for many is to react immediately, to hold the gaze longer, to escalate, to do something with the moment. But often, the most powerful response is composure. Meeting the gaze calmly, without overreacting, and then returning to the flow of the interaction. Why? Because it maintains balance. It keeps the interaction from becoming forced or awkward. It allows the dynamic to build organically rather than trying to accelerate it prematurely. And that sense of ease, that lack of urgency, actually reinforces attraction because it signals confidence without needing to prove it. You have to understand attraction is not just about being noticed. It's about how you handle being noticed. When you respond with calm awareness instead of excitement or pressure, it creates a different kind of dynamic, one that feels grounded, controlled, and natural. And that's what people are drawn to. So as you move forward, start paying attention not just to whether someone looks at you, but how often their attention returns. Notice the rhythm, the repetition, the subtle pull that keeps bringing their focus back in your direction. Because the first look may be accidental, but the second, the third, the fourth, that's where intention begins to reveal itself. And when you learn to recognize that pattern without rushing to define it, you step into a different level of awareness. One where you're no longer guessing, you're observing reality as it unfolds. Because in the end, attraction doesn't demand attention, it returns to what it values. And when you see that clearly, you don't need to chase the signal. You simply recognize it. Now, once you begin to recognize patterns and attention, how the eyes return, how focus lingers, the next layer becomes even more grounded, more physical, and in many ways, more honest. Because while the eyes can hint at interest, the body tends to confirm it. And one of the clearest ways it does that is through proximity and orientation. In simple terms, where someone places themselves around you and how they position their body reveals far more than most people realize. Human beings are constantly managing space. We move closer to what we're comfortable with, and we create distance from what we're unsure about. This isn't something we consciously calculate every second. It's instinctive. It's guided by emotion, not low. Check. So when attraction is present, that instinct begins to shift. Distance decreases. You'll notice it in subtle ways. Maybe she stands just a little closer than necessary when speaking to you. Maybe in a group setting, she naturally positions herself within your space, even when there are other options available. It's not forced, it's not announced, it just happens. And often, she may not even be aware she's doing it. But proximity alone isn't the full picture. Orientation matters just as much. Where the body points is where attention goes. If someone is engaged with you, their body begins to align in your direction. Their feet, their shoulders, their torso, they subtly angle toward you, even if the conversation includes other people. This alignment is incredibly telling because it reflects priority. It shows where their focus is naturally settling. And here's what makes this so powerful. It's very difficult to fake consistently. Someone can choose to stand near you once. They can intentionally face you for a moment. But maintaining that alignment over time across different moments without conscious effort, that's where authenticity shows up. That's where behavior becomes reliable. Now, just like with eye contact, the mistake many people make is isolating a single moment. She stood close once, so it must mean something. But again, it's not about isolating actions, it's about patterns. Does she repeatedly find her way into your space? Does her body consistently orient toward you, even when there's no obvious reason to do so? If the answer is yes, you're no longer guessing, you're observing a pattern of comfort and interest, and comfort is key here. Because proximity without comfort doesn't happen naturally. People protect their personal space instinctively. So when someone allows you into that space or chooses to enter yours, it signals a level of ease, a level of trust. Then if it's subtle and still developing, but there's another layer to this that often gets overlooked, it's not just about how close she gets. It's about whether she stays. Anyone can pass through your space briefly. But when someone lingers, when they remain within your proximity even after the initial reason for being there has passed, that's where intention starts to reveal itself. That lingering presence suggests that the interaction itself, not just the circumstance, is what's holding their attention. Now, your response to this matters. Most people either ignore it completely or misread it and react too quickly. Ignoring it means missing opportunity to understand what's happening. Overreacting by trying to escalate too fast breaks the natural flow. It introduces pressure where there was previously ease. The key is awareness without urgency. You notice the proximity, you recognize the orientation, but instead of jumping to conclusions, you allow the interaction to continue naturally. You meet that comfort with your own grounded presence. No sudden shifts, no forced moves, just alignment. Because when you respond with the same level of ease that's being shown to you, it reinforces the dynamic. It allows it to deepen organically without disrupting it. And that's where real connection starts to build. Not through force, but through mutual alignment. So as you move forward, pay attention to space. Not just what's being said, not just where the eyes go, but where the body chooses to be. Notice the distance, the direction, the consistency, because the body doesn't overthink. It moves toward what feels right. And when someone consistently moves closer, aligns with you, and chooses to stay within your space, they're telling you something without ever needing to say a word. In the end, attraction doesn't just look at you, it moves toward you. Now, as you begin to recognize tension, proximity, and orientation, we move into one of the most powerful and most misunderstood signals of all, touch. Because touch changes the dynamic instantly. It's no longer just observation at a distance. It's no longer subtle in the same way as eye contact or body alignment. Touch brings interaction into the physical world, and that's exactly why it carries so much meaning. But it's also where most people misread the situation entirely. They either dismiss it or they rush it. Let's slow this down and understand what's actually happening. When a woman initiates light, casual touch on your arm, your shoulder, even a brief, playful nudge, it often appears harmless on the surface. Easy to brush off as friendliness, personality, or habit. And sometimes it is. Context always matters. But when that touch is repeated, when it feels natural rather than forced, and when it's paired with the other signals we've already discussed, it begins to tell a very different story. Because touch is about comfort. And comfort at a physical level is not given freely. Human beings are wired to protect their personal boundaries. We don't casually allow physical contact with people we feel uncertain about. So when that boundary is crossed, not in an aggressive or forced way, but in a light, fluid, almost effortless way, it signals something important. It signals ease. Now here's where the nuance comes in. Not all touch is equal. A one-time situational contact like handing something over or briefly brushing past doesn't mean much. But when touch becomes part of the interaction, when it shows up again and again without awkwardness, that's when it shifts from coincidence to pattern. Patterns are what matter. Maybe she touches your arm when she laughs. Maybe she lightly taps you to emphasize a point. Maybe there's a playful energy that creates these small moments of contact. Each individuate. All action might seem insignificant, but together they create a rhythm. And that rhythm reflects comfort, engagement, and often attraction. But here's the critical mistake most men make. They interpret touch as permission to escalate immediately. And that's where everything breaks. Because touch, in this context, is not a green light to take control of the interaction. It's not an invitation to push boundaries. It's a signal, a subtle one that says, I'm comfortable here. And if you respond to that signal with too much intensity too quickly, you disrupt the very comfort that created it in the first place. You turn ease into pressure. Instead, the correct response is awareness with restraint. You recognize the touch, you register the comfort behind it, but you don't rush to match or exceed it. You allow the interaction to continue at its natural pace. You stay grounded, because grounded presence is what maintains attraction, not impulsive reaction. There's also something deeper happening here psychologically. When touch is initiated in a relaxed, natural way, it creates a subtle emotional connection. It reduces distance, not just physically, but mentally. It shifts the interaction from purely conversational to experiential, and experiences are what people remember. But that connection only grows if it's handled correctly. If you remain composed, if you allow those moments to exist without overanalyzing or forcing them into something more, the interaction continues to build naturally. There's no pressure, no awkwardness, just a gradual deepening of comfort and engagement. And that's where attraction thrives. Now, this doesn't mean you ignore it completely. It means you respect it. You understand its place within the larger pattern. You see it as one piece of a bigger picture, not the entire picture itself. Because attraction is never built on a single signal. It's built on alignment, attention, proximity, responsiveness. And yes, touch, all working together. So as you move forward, change the way you interpret physical contact. Don't dismiss it as meaningless, but don't overvalue it either. Learn to read it in context, to recognize when it's part of a consistent pattern of comfort and engagement. Because the truth is, touch doesn't demand a reaction. It reveals a level of trust. And when you learn to respect that trust instead of rushing it, you don't just maintain attraction, you allow it to grow. Now, as you begin to understand attention, proximity, and even touch, there's another layer that brings all of this into sharper focus, and that is emotional responsiveness. Because attraction is not just something you see in the body, it's something you feel in the way someone responds to you. This is where the interaction becomes alive. When a woman is genuinely engaged, her reactions begin to shift. They're no longer neutral or polite. They become expressive, fluid, and sometimes even slightly unpredictable. She laughs more easily, even at things that aren't objectively that funny. She reacts to your words with energy, not just acknowledgement. There's a sense that what you're saying is affecting her state in real time, and that's the key. Your presence is creating a response. Now, understand this clearly. People don't invest emotionally without a reason. Attention can be given out of politeness. Proximity can happen due to circumstance, but emotional responsiveness, real responsiveness, requires engagement. It requires that something about the interaction is pulling them in, holding their focus, and creating a shift in how they feel. You'll notice it in small ways. Her tone becomes warmer, more animated. Her facial expressions become more dynamic, smiling more, reacting more, showing subtle changes that reflect what she's experiencing in the moment. Even nervous energy can appear, slight fidgeting, playful teasing, or moments where she seems just a bit more self-aware than usual. These aren't random behaviors. They're signals that the interaction matters. Because when someone is emotionally neutral, their responses are predictable. They nod, they respond politely, they maintain a steady, controlled demeanor. But when attraction enters the picture, that control loosens. There's more variation, more spontaneity, more life in the interaction. And that variation is what you need to pay attention to. But again, the mistake many people make is misreading intensity. They think bigger reactions automatically mean stronger attraction. That's not always true. Emotional responsive isn't about how loud or dramatic the reaction is. It's about consistency and direction. Is she responding to you more than to others? Is her energy shifting when she engages with you specifically? That's where the real insight lies. Now, there's also a deeper psychological layer here. When someone becomes emotionally responsive around you, it means they're allowing themselves to be affected. And that requires a level of openness. A willingness, even if subtle, to let their guard down just enough to experience the interaction rather than control it. And that openness is not given lightly. It's built through everything we've already discussed. Your awareness, your authenticity, the emotional safety you create. When those elements are in place, responsiveness becomes a natural outcome. It's not something you force, it's something you allow. Your role then is not to chase those reactions, but to recognize them. Because the moment you start performing for reactions, trying to be funnier, more impressive, more engaging just to maintain that response, you shift out of authenticity and back into performance. And performance, as we've already established, breaks connection. Instead, stay grounded. Notice the changes without becoming dependent on them. Allow the interaction to flow without trying to control every emotional outcome. Because true responsiveness doesn't need to be maintained, it sustains itself when the connection is real. There's also something important to understand about emotional investment. When someone is responsive, they're not just reacting, they're contributing energy to the interaction. And when that participation becomes consistent, it signals that the connection is moving beyond surface level engagement. It becomes mutual. And mutuality is where attraction begins to stabilize into something more meaningful. It's no longer one-sided observation. It's shared experience. So as you move forward, pay attention not just to what she does physically, but how she responds emotionally. Notice the shifts in energy, the changes in expression, the subtle signs that your presence is having an effect, because in the end, attraction is not just about being seen, it's about being felt. And when someone begins to feel something in your presence, consistently and naturally, you're no longer guessing where you stand, you're experiencing it in real time. That's the difference between interaction and connection. And connection is what people remember. Now, when you step back and look at everything we've covered, attention, eye contact, proximity, touch, emotional responsiveness, you begin to see a pattern. Not just in behavior, but in understanding, because any one of these signals on its own can be misleading. But when they begin to repeat, align, and show up consistently over time, something shifts. It stops being interpretation and starts becoming clarity. This is where most people either gain real awareness or fall into confusion. They focus on isolated moments instead of patterns. A single glance becomes a story. One good conversation becomes certainty. One instance of touch becomes assumption. And when those moments don't repeat, doubt takes over. But attraction isn't built on moments. It's revealed through consistency. Consistency is the filter that separates coincidence from intention. Anyone can have a good moment. Anyone can display a signal once, maybe twice. But very few behaviors sustain themselves over time without a genuine underlying reason. And attraction, when it's real, has a way of repeating itself naturally. Not perfectly, not in a scripted way, but consistently enough that you begin to recognize it without forcing it. You'll notice that she continues to engage, not just when it's convenient, but when she has options. She finds ways to re-enter the interaction, to keep the connection active, even in small ways. The signals we talked about earlier, they don't disappear after one moment. They show up again in slightly different forms across different situations. And that repetition is what gives you confidence, not in a forced, ego-driven way, but in a grounded, observational way. Because when something is consistent, you don't need to question it constantly. Now, this doesn't mean perfection. Consistency doesn't mean every interaction is strong, every signal is clear, every moment is aligned. Human behavior fluctuates. People have moods, distractions, external factors that influence how they show up. But even within that variation, patterns remain. And your job is to recognize the pattern, not chase perfection. This is where patience becomes essential. Most people rush to define what's happening before enough evidence is there. They want certainty too early, and in doing so, they either overcommit or withdraw prematurely. But when you allow time to reveal patterns, you remove that pressure. You don't need to force clarity. It emerges. There's also a deeper shift that happens when you start focusing on consistency. You stop reacting to every small change. You stop being pulled into emotional highs and lows based on isolated moments. Instead, you develop a steadier perspective. You begin to trust what you observe over time rather than what you feel in a single interaction. And that steadiness is powerful because it changes how you show up. You become less reactive, less needy for immediate answers. You operate with a sense of calm awareness. And that alone makes your presence more grounded, more attractive, more aligned with the kind of connection you're trying to build. Now, here's something important. Consistency doesn't just apply to her behavior. It applies to yours as well. Because while you're observing patterns, she's doing the same. She's noticing how you show up, how you respond, whether your behavior is stable or unpredictable. Attraction is not just about being seen. It's about being experienced over time. And people trust what they can predict. So if your presence is grounded, your communication is consistent, and your awareness remains steady, you contribute to that sense of stability. You make it easier for the connection to grow because there's no confusion, no unnecessary pressure, no emotional volatility. Everything feels natural. And that's the goal, not to force attraction, not to manufacture it, but to recognize it when it's there and allow it to develop without interference. So as you move forward, remember this. Don't build your understanding on moments, build it on patterns. Look for what repeats, what sustains, what continues without effort. Because in the end, attraction doesn't prove itself in a single instant. It proves itself over time. And when you learn to trust consistency, you stop chasing answers and start recognizing truth.